Welcome everyone. Thank you very much for tuning into our interview or little discussion on the vertical farming space. My name is Florian. I'm in charge of the DACH business for Rize ETF, and I got Pierre here today, who's a research and business manager for Yasai, which is a vertical farming company in Switzerland, which he will tell us a bit more about in a second. But the point here today really is that we, of course, at Rize look at a range of mega trends and sustainable topics in the fund space. And one of those is, of course, the sustainable future of food. And in general, the theme, how our food system's going to transition to a more, sustainable way in the coming years and decades. And one of the most exciting parts of that whole transition is really the vertical farming space, which is a big part of it. And there is a lot of different, aspects in that space, and something I speak a lot about. I get a lot of questions from clients, but also I always try to really make it relatable to the DACH region, Germany, Switzerland, Austria, and see how really this stuff is happening at home or at our doorsteps, really. So that's the exact reason why I got Pierre here today, because he really is, someone who has a great deal of knowledge in that space, that can speak about it and give a lot more insights, how something like that works, what the differences are in the space, and how that market might be developing, especially in the DACH region. So Pierre, long story short, thank you very much for your time. We obviously worked together in London a couple of years back, and when I saw you now in the vertical farming space, I thought it would be great to reconnect, and pick this up and pick your brains a bit on this topic. So thank you very much for being here today.
Of course, with pleasure.
Right.
Thanks for the flattering comments too.
Of course. No, I've seen already when we chatted, before our interview today, that it's really exciting and a lot of stuff is happening. So maybe to start with, that people have a bit of an idea why I'm even talking to you. Tell me a bit about what you do and what your company Yasai does, so just that our audience has a bit of an understanding.
Sure. Of course. So I'm an operations manager or business manager at Yasai. I also take care of the research markets focused primarily for the company. Yasai is the first industrial scale hydroponic vertical farm in Switzerland. It's a lot of words, but technically what we do is controlled environment agriculture, and we grow plants in water in stacked layers. We've just completed our pilot farm here in close to Zurich. It's a 600 square meter farm that produces roughly 25 tons of fresh herbs, delivered straight primarily to the retail market here in Switzerland.
Perfect. So there's a couple of things maybe where I already gone wrong when I spoke to you last time. Vertical farming isn't vertical farming. There's a lot of different aspects which people usually refer to as vertical farming, but it isn't all the same. So maybe you can give a quick overview of what different types there are, because we have hydroponics, aeroponics, etc. And then there's vertical farming, there's smart farming. Maybe you can just give a quick overview of what different types of vertical farming there is, and what vertical actually means in that sense.
Sure. So maybe to take it just a quick step back, the name Yasai comes from Japanese, which means vegetables. And the reason why we wanted to give that name to the company is that the Japanese were actually the first people to farm vertically. And by vertically, it meant above the soil in a sort of pyramidal shape installation where they could maximize yield per square meter. So when we think about vertical, it's always something that is going to be above ground. Generally, we talk about soilless agriculture. In the case of Yasai, we grow plants in water, but you can also grow them in aeroponic settings, which is basically a sprinkler that would sprinkle water on the roots of the plants, or dryponics, which is something that Endeavor, a German company, was doing, which is essentially just preventing. Sorry, someone just jumped in. which is essentially not giving water to the plant for a very long period, stressing them to then use a minimal amount of water resource for them to grow. So there is a lot of different ways of growing. When we think vertically, it's generally stacked layers. Then the farming techniques and the technologies used will kind of differ.
Yeah, okay.
So I don't know if you wanted to deep dive into a particular one.
No, I guess for me, the one thing, the bottom line is what you said before. So is that ultimately the key, the one thing that's across all those technologies is that they're essentially all soilless, right? So that they all grow soilless, which is also one of the reasons when we say why even vertical farm is the environmental aspects on it, that for the fact that it's soilless. And I think maybe you can say a bit about just the environmental impact, or say the lack of environmental impact, you can achieve with vertical farming, because that's obviously one huge aspect of the whole industry as well.
So it depends how you take it, because it's often claimed in the industry that vertical farming is more sustainable than traditional farming.
Yeah.
Full life cycle analysis actually have shown the contrary, because we use a lot of electricity. But in terms of the production efficiency that we are able to achieve, at Yasai, for example, we can produce 200 times more per square meter footage than traditional farms, using 95% less fresh water.
Yeah.
We don't use any chemical pesticides. So these are sustainability factors that are quite interesting. When I think about sustainability, I also see it as not only something that is purely environmental, but also social and economic.
Yeah.
On the environmental side, what we can the sustainability aspect is that because we need less space to grow, we can actually use that land to do regenerative agriculture or plant new forests or anything. And then you basically are going to concentrate production in urban areas, which shortens the food demands, allows for fresher products, which means that it's also more nutritious for the individuals consuming it, create green jobs in cities. And on the economic aspect, the industry is notoriously known for struggling to achieve a profit.
Yeah.
I think this is also due to, yes, exactly. I mean, I'm in the space, so I'm obviously a strong believer that we can achieve this one day. But think of it as the beginning of solar panels. Very high production costs, low efficiency. And right now I'm super excited every time I see a new player in the space, even if it's in Switzerland. It means that there is interest, technology is developing, and we've already seen huge improvements, like in the space of LEDs in the last 10 years.
Yeah, like something I watched before, it seemed to be that the LED, that's just one of the things I'm going to pick up on that one, is the LEDs, that used to be the major hindrance in the industry, right? How costly it was to generate electricity and the LEDs to be used in the space to make it efficient. And I think since the cost of LEDs has gone down as well, like the whole idea has really become feasible to do, right?
Yeah, of course. I mean, when we look at the OPEX costs of Yasai, the majority of it's because we're in Switzerland. Is linked to rent and labor.
Yeah.
When it comes down to electricity, it's actually a very low part of that budget. And what's interesting as well is that because the production of renewables or like renewable energy share on the European market is increasing, it's becoming increasingly easier to get certified renewable energy. You can operate your farm on 100% renewables, which is what we're doing at the moment.
Yeah. And I mean, the one thing you mentioned, we obviously in the business of megatrends, and I think just with vertical farming, it's part of the sustainable food transition. It's part of urbanization, so more and more people living in cities, like you mentioned, shorter supply chain, shorter away from consumer or from production to consumer, but also the healthcare aspect, obviously, more nutrition, etc. The last thing I wanted to pick up on these differences, Pierre, between, indoor, vertical, aeroponic, etc. Is there one type that is usually, focuses on, say, only on herbs, and then there's one that's more built for, say, fruits or vegetables, or is there, you know, are they all pretty flexible?
I think you really have to adapt based on the plant's needs. If you take tomatoes, for example, they need a lot of water.
Yeah.
So growing them in aeroponics or dryponics might not be the very best solution, but actually most of the tomatoes that you eat nowadays that come from the Netherlands are produced in a hydroponic setting. So it's not a vertical farm, it's a greenhouse because they grow up to 9 meters. But these plants that require a lot of water are going to grow particularly well in hydroponics. If your plant, let's take rosemary. It's a Mediterranean plant, generally likes well-drained, dry soils. This grows quite well in aeroponics. But then it really depends on the type of plant. But in terms of the usage of technology, roughly 70%, don't ping me on this, but roughly 70% of players globally use hydroponics technologies, around 15 to 20% aeroponics, and then after that it comes to dryponics, fogponics, bioponics.
But you still could do all of them vertically?
Well, it depends what's economical. So I mentioned tomatoes. It doesn't really make sense to have it in a farm where layers are stacked on top of each other between 40 and 100 centimeters because the plant will grow so high. Conversely, if you think about leafy greens like salads, it's quite efficient to start growing them in a hydroponic setting for the first phase of their growth. So when they're at the baby or teenage stage. But as soon as the salad head will fully open, it will take so much space that you will have to A, transplant it, and B, increase the energy input. So it makes a lot more sense to grow it in a greenhouse, and research has shown that it grows pretty well with aeroponics. There's a pretty cool company here in Switzerland that achieves clean greens, that achieves yields of 95 kilogram of salad per square meter, which is roughly a third higher than what you could achieve in a vertical farming setting, hydroponic wise. But they farm for greenhouses.
Yeah. All right. Okay. But it's essentially like, it all sounds a bit like you have the ability to essentially base your output on the research on, you know, what works best for what type of, you know, vegetable, herbs, leafy greens, whatever. And then you can sort of go by with a Lego approach. You know, if you want to go vertically, you can. If it doesn't make sense, you don't. But you have all those essentially technologies that, you know, really enable you to do it soilless, low environmental impact, you know, as long as the electricity footprint gets a bit more efficient and the usage, which it obviously has massively already over the last years. Otherwise, I don't think what we said earlier, this wouldn't even be possible today. But it really is also a massive, you know, a technology operation, really. I think you mentioned before, you know, it's not just the grow in itself, it's also the technology that develops with that space.
Exactly. And I think that the best way to look at it is not necessarily by looking at technologies separately. So, okay, they're doing greenhouse, they're doing vertical farming, but it's actually combining these technologies together. You could produce your seedlings in a vertical farming setting, boost the plant growth at a very early stage, and then transplant it in a greenhouse where it's more resource efficient to reach the full head of the salad, for example.
Yeah, perfect. And one thing, we already touched on it briefly, and I obviously mainly noticed because of App Harvest, and when they reported earnings recently, what their plan is with doubling their plants, and they say they, you know, they want to go from herbs to tomatoes to berries. What sort of the future you see? Like, will we be able to grow a much broader spectrum of fruit, vegetable, herbs, greens, or is there sort of a limiting, you know, could we grow, who knows, the strawberries, raspberries, berries, whatever that really works in these settings? Is that?
Yeah, I think it all comes down to the economics. Like the space is growing, sadly, because climate change is starting to bite us. Food prices are increasing. I mean, with the current situation, you talked about megatrends, but of course, demographic growth.
Yeah.
There are more people, they need to be fed. We don't have unlimited land resources. We're going to have to rethink the way that we farm.
Yeah.
So this is very important, and food prices, for example, recently have increased by 28% on a global level. If it keeps on this trend, then yes, it will very soon make any vertical farm very profitable. But hopefully we won't get there. But you could, in theory, grow pretty much any plant you want. The problem is going to be how fast can you do it? What yields can you achieve? What's the best technology to do that? And research and plant science takes a lot of time. So I don't see us growing. It wouldn't either make sense to grow banana trees in a vertical farming setting, but in theory, you could.
Yeah. No, okay, because it's obviously interesting to see where that goes. But I guess the more you can grow, the more variety you have, you know, the more competitive you can be. And I guess it's also a combination for you with regards to where this industry is going to go. But what do you see right now as being the biggest hurdle for the vertical farming space or the indoor farming space? What's the biggest hurdle? Is it in general, I don't know, is it getting the collaborations? Is it getting the product out there? Is it the efficiency? Is it the high, you know, OPEX, CAPEX costs involved? Where's still, like, say, a bit more of a struggle with the industry?
I think it's a mix of this. So to start with, it costs a lot of money to set up a vertical farm. So your initial costs are super high. And in the end, you're still a farmer. So I think there was a lot of hype for the past 10 years about this new techie way of farming, but in the end, you're still farming. And because we're not able to produce yet any kind of plant, and our costs are still high, it's still very difficult also to, it's a very tight profit margin market. Another thing is definitely regulation. The space is evolving much faster than regulation, at least in Europe. In the US, for example, if you grow soilless, you can be certified organic. In Europe, this is something that's just not there yet, and I don't see it coming into place before at least 10 to 15 years. So this is a big harm, because in the last 20 years, there's been a lot of lobby from the organic food producers. It's very good, of course. I'm a strong supporter of that. But what people don't generally know is that when you farm organically, you still use pesticides, which harm your health. And in a vertical farming setting, you don't. So technically, we are in a way beyond organic, but cannot be recognized as even being organic. So educating the consumer is also a big hassle. And I would say getting to our customers, in the case of Yasai, it's retailer, that's relatively easy, because the main pain point of retailer is to secure quality in quantity, and all of this in a secure environment, and to secure the supply of all these products. So if you can basically answer these three challenges of your customers, they're more than happy to have you as a supplier. Now, the prices that they were used to, or import prices, you'll never be able to compete with this. And so that's also kind of the value proposition that you have. You produce locally, more sustainably, and this has a premium in a certain way.
Well, I mean, it's a similar thing, but I guess this is also something that's accepted. And when we were looking at it with our research partners as well, ultimately, especially through COVID, you could see that people, this whole thing, the sustainable transition, and, you know, the transition to the future of food, especially a sustainable one, is very much consumer driven, right? It's driven by me and you and our decision making. And that's something research shows, when we look at surveys, that throughout COVID, a lot of the consumers got more conscious about what they eat, you know, how they purchase what they eat, how they purchase the ingredients. And I think you can really see already this drive towards, okay, slightly higher prices for something, but also the quality, the environmental impact, etc. You know, it is considered. And I think it's exactly what you say when we speak about that as well, because obviously we can't go from today to tomorrow. We just we farm vertically or indoors. Not possible. You know, it's just not something that is possible right now. But in the whole transition, you know, obviously the next best step is that the traditional way of farming, you know, uses less pesticides, biostimulus-based ones, so it's not the biggest problem, you know, with runoffs, etc., which is obviously a big problem of the traditional farming. You know, the amount of pesticides used is not efficient, the land use change, they're all big problems from the environmental perspective. But if we manage to change that as the middle step, and then the ultimate end goal, you know, is the vertical farming indoor space, then that's really something, you know, where then you have no pesticides, controlled environment, secure output. Like, that's really how this whole transition goes. But it's like we always say, it's early stages of this, you know, this space and how it's developing. And this won't happen tomorrow, probably won't happen in 3 years, 5, 7, 10 years. That's how we look at this, you know, as a trend or theme that's very, very consumer centric and consumer driven, developing, you know, over that time. And maybe at that point we could also have a look at, because obviously my experience is very US centric, because that's where the bigger players are. Maybe you can give a bit of an insight how that market has developed in the EU or Switzerland, or, you know, generally the DACH region. You know, just so we can have a bit of an understanding how much of a part that already plays, you know, at home, basically.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, the first big players to come out in the US were about 20 years ago. In Europe, it was around 10. There's always this 10-year gap between the two regions. But to be fair, since I joined Yasai, I think the number of companies in Europe has rose by 25% already. So it's a lot of, basically there are farming companies, the vertical farming companies, that mushroom all the time. A lot of them fail, a lot of them just stagnate. You obviously heard about InFarm, German company, but headquartered in the Netherlands. Here in Switzerland alone, when I joined, we were 6 main players. Now we're already at 9. Austria is developing quite a lot, but it's primarily focused on small scale and still at the research stage. Germany saw its first, or this year actually, last year, sorry. So the first consolidation in the space in Europe, with Calera acquiring Endeavor for around 130 or 140 million. Calera had very, very low revenues.
That's the only other one I knew. Calera I had heard of before.
But yeah, Endeavor, and it's not the first that Calera purchased. The other one was Vindara, seed producer. So they kind of vertically integrate. Calera is a highly efficient operator.
Vertically,
Endeavor, exactly. Very efficient operator, but had no patents. Endeavor had around 25, I think, at the time of the acquisition, a very strong team of data scientists, software developers. So they really focused on developing a technology that they could then sell. I would say that in the space, there are 2 main business models. Either you develop a tech and you focus on that, or you become very strong at operating farms, controlling your costs, and using the very best and latest technologies that are available. But if you try to do both, it's going to be very hard to fund your research with the revenues of salads.
Yeah, well, you know where this applies quite well in this. Another theme that's quite, or sub-theme in that space is, it's not directly related, but just in terms of business model, what you describe is supply chain technology. And you look here in the UK with Ocado. Obviously, they are a retail company, right? So they run that space, but really what they also are is a supply chain tech company that run warehouses across the globe with their technologies, right? So it sounds very similar to that model, how it works in the vertical farming space. Either you're operator with lots of farms, or you really focus on the tech patents, and you come in that way. But you say there isn't really one player that has both yet. So superior tech and patents and a large farm network.
You could argue that InFarm has patents and a big network. I mean, they pivoted a bit in their business model. They started by putting those small scale 25 square meter hydroponic farms inside retail stores.
Yeah.
Obviously, there are regions in the world, Switzerland, for example, where if you ask for 25 square meter inside a retail in Zurich city center, the retailer is just gonna say no. So they had to adjust, and they had a lot of problem with supplying these, let's call them mini grow chambers, because it's not with 25 square meters that you're going to have security of supply and volume in terms of herbs. So they had to replenish those, and this takes a lot of time. So now you see them pivoting towards more large-scale farms, which are obviously a lot more expensive, but where they are applying their technology to a certain extent. So they're on the right track, I would say. But they say it themselves, they struggle to generate a profit. You see, I mean, you can take also the example of aero farms, 5 huge farms, less than 3 million in revenues per annum.
Yeah.
And so
it's not
and they focused a lot on tech. They developed, or like they were at the forefront of aeroponics.
Yeah.
It's not just how you farm the plant, it's also how you're going to automate your production to drive your costs down.
Yeah, I guess it's never enough to just have the best tech or, be the best in one thing if it essentially doesn't drive revenues too.
But the tech evolves very fast. Like if you think about LEDs, if you wanted to develop your own, then great. Okay, you spend 5 years developing your LEDs, and Philips comes in with a big background knowledge and factories in China to produce at scale and very fast, and invest also huge amounts in R&D. So you've spent 5 years doing that. They probably spent 1, and they came out with a prototype that is better than yours. So does it make sense to compete against these kind of guys, or do you just want to use them and leverage the money they invested in R&D to make your farms more profitable?
Yeah, no, exactly. And I guess at that point, we discussed the space in quite some length, and it's really interesting, to hear from you on that side, how that whole thing's developing. Definitely learned something here. But what I'm now interested in is just you guys at Yasai, what's happening next? So I think I saw on LinkedIn. Is it co-op where you sell? So you're already in the shop. So if you're in Zurich, have a look. I'm there next week, so I'm going to have a look if I see one. But what's next? Where you sort of go into, and it sort of plans with new plants, new produce. What's happening?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah, so we started by distributing basil in the middle of winter. We're in nearly 100 stores now in Switzerland, and our big focus, because of COVID, the farm construction got pretty delayed. Let's be transparent on this. So we're still building up knowledge on how to operate the farm, but it's going pretty fast, and we're planning to release 2 extra products, so mint and coriander, in the coming month. And of course, like the demand in Switzerland is quite high. In terms of the customers that we've been speaking to in the retail space only, we are already oversubscribed. So the production capacity of our farm wouldn't be enough to supply the demand that we've got. So that's a good sign. Now the challenge is going to be how picky and can we afford to be picky on the customers that we have? Make sure that we don't overpromise, because in the end, we're not a software company. The marginal cost of adding just 1 more kilo of basil once our farm is at full production capacity is potentially just building a new farm. And that also takes time. So there's a lot of planning going behind it. It's a big infrastructure project. And we're talking with our customers to develop those future infrastructure projects to supply the demand that they have. So this year it's going to be about scaling our production, hopefully reaching the monthly recurring revenues that we were predicting by December. There will be a Series A round at the end of 2022 or beginning of 2023. Can't disclose too much about this yet.
Yeah. we will see. I'm sure we'll see about it.
But yeah, no, it's a lot of exciting things. I think we're really going to focus on making sure that we operate the farm at full production capacity, systematically reduce our costs, and yeah, hire the right people to continue scaling our vision.
No, brilliant. Sounds very exciting. Sounds similar to what we do. Keep getting out exciting, themes and trends in the space, and I'm really excited to see how Yasai is going to develop in the space. My last question, Pierre, is just a tricky one. How high can you go in vertical farming? How high could you go?
The sky is your limit, I would say.
I thought you would say that. I mean,
if you wanted, you could build a vertical farm. You could replace one of the elevators or elevator cage of the Burj Khalifa and just stack up layers after layers and distribute those on every layer or on every floor of the building. There's no real limit. I think the limiting factor is actually the existing infrastructure or the real estate.
Yeah.
So one development area that we're looking into is actually to integrate vertical farms into the built environment, not just by reusing empty warehouses, but on new built construction projects. And there's some exciting stuff that are going to happen for Yasai in the next 5 years in that space, but think about it as the smart city of tomorrow. Yeah. What if most of the plants that you could grow were grown inside your building? What if you could just use a lamp to get salads delivered in a partnership with Otis or Schneider, the elevators? Yeah, would just deliver something that has been harvested. Schneider that has been harvested like 10 minutes before in a fully automated vertical farm. Yeah. Full automation, we're not there yet. There's always going to be some people to control stuff, but it could be a big advantage to basically produce where you live and to green your cities. There are less farmers out there. Urbanization is on the rise. We will need to produce locally, and if we make it very efficient and highly automated, these can actually be quite well-paid jobs, because you could have just one person operating, I don't know, roughly 100,000 square meter farm that is in the would-be car park of your building.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that's something I'd seen before. And I mean, it's such an exciting space, and there's so many mega trends that, play into your cards, and I think can support what you're doing and what the whole vertical farming space or indoor farming space is really doing. And then we see it similar. We see it as such a big trend as part of our, transition to a food system, whether it be, we have to feed more people, but we for sure have to feed them more sustainable. So totally agree, Pierre. Thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Good catching up with you again, and hopefully see you in Zurich when I'm there next time. Thank you.
With great pleasure.